I don't know if you all know it, but I really love this show. It gets better every week, and we talk about it, myself and Jim, all the time. But, we're 130 something episodes in, and it just seems like we're really expanding the topics we can talk about, all related, of course, somehow to Star Trek Adventures RPG or Captain's Log, the solo RPG. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures, along with being a blogger on Continuing Missions, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures and Captain's Log. And of course, the show is never a show unless I have my partner in crime with me, Jim Johnson.
Hey, everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, both brought to you by Modiphius Entertainment. These many years now, 8 years strong, and co-host on this show with Michael, 130 odd episodes strong, 2 years, going on 2 years. Yeah. And boy, you're right. The shows just get better and better. And I'll admit to a little, what is it? It's not egotism. It's self. I don't know. Whatever it is. Every Friday when we release the show or the recording, I have to book myself some time. That's my lunch break. I grab my lunch and I sit down and I watch the show and I reflect and remember what we talked about 3 to 4 weeks prior or however long it is. And I get to indulge in the guests because I get to listen to them without actually being in the moment, talking to them. Right. So it's
I wake up and I hit play because I'll make sure at 6 o'clock exactly. I get up, hit play, and that's my first hour of the day.
And to still be doing this now after almost 2 years is astounding. So I'm grateful for that. Grateful for our wonderful guests here tonight, both of who've been on the show before. So we will skip the usual what's your favorite show, favorite character, etc., unless you feel like talking about it. And then, of course, talk about yourself and plug anything that you want to plug, anything important that's been happening to you or anything that you want to promote. And we'll start off with Kelli. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Kelli Fitzpatrick. I'm a science fiction writer. I've had the pleasure of writing for Star Trek Adventures for several books, the Shackleton Expanse Campaign Guide and the Discovery book and the Klingon Core Rule book. And it is by far my favorite RPG game. I write short fiction. Also, I'm a winner of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds contest. I have a space Western story coming out soon from Baen Books in a book called Last Train Out of Kepler 283c. It's super fun to write. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about Star Trek Adventures.
Can't wait to read that. Please make sure to let us know so we can promote when you do that.
Yeah. Please do. I'm a sucker for Westerns, whether it's a space Western or a weird Western or regular Westerns, whatever. I'm excited to read it. So do share the link when you have it available.
Well, Jim, you wrote 3 of them, right? Didn't you write like 3 Egyptian Westerns?
I did. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. Plus a bunch of other stuff that I haven't published yet, but we'll get there someday. And then Al, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Al Spader. I'm a freelance writer and game designer, Star Trek Adventures. I was the lead writer on the Federation Klingon War Tactical campaign. And I guess my latest claim to fame is apparently Spader cards and the Al Spader variant of a 3D print tricorder that holds your Star Trek Adventures D20. So, yeah.
That man has Star Trek related products coming out. I'm going to trademark those before you do. All right. So we are here, and let me say why we have our special guest with us today. Jim and I dream of a day where me and him have a business and people hire us to run their corporate learning events. And we use Star Trek Adventures in order to play them through leadership issues using RPG. That's our dream. But we actually have people here today who specialize in education and have incorporated RPG or RPG related education somehow into their curriculums. So I'm so excited to hear about this because I'm telling you right now, school was hard for me. I got through it purely to get through it. So I graduated at age 15 just so I could get out of it so I could start my career, right? I hated it so much, I got through it quickly. But if I would have had teachers like Kelli, I know you are, and Al, I know you are because of what I've heard, it would have changed my life. I would have never left school probably. I probably would have had too much fun. So today we really want to talk about this and want to figure out, even our viewers, like, are you using education or RPG in any form of education? We've even had on this show Connor Self, who's a sociologist at school, and he has used forms of RPG with kids. So that's what this episode is about. And maybe we can start with both of you telling us a little bit about what you do with the realm of mixing education with RPG, just so that we understand what you're doing, and then we can start plying you with all these cool questions. Why don't we go ahead and start with Al this time, and then go to Kelly.
Excellent. Yeah. So I teach middle school, an age group that is always entertaining, and they usually need a lot of structure around what it is that we're asking them to do. So my first, I guess, forays into RPG with them didn't have anything to do with any games that were on the market or anything like that. It was literally just putting them into positions where they have to make decisions and have their decisions impact what happened. To the big one that we did was they were like peasants in medieval times, and they had to keep track of their supplies and whatnot as we did put them in different scenarios, and based off of how they answered and how they performed, they would either like gain a dozen eggs or lose a chicken and things like that. And they had these big grids of all the stuff that they were keeping track of and whatnot. And that was really just putting them, in a peasant person's point of view from several hundred years ago. So that's kind of where we started. And I massage that into, when I was doing my science fiction curriculum into, you're all characters on a ship, and here's the scenario. What are you going to do? This is what happens to the ship, and so on and so forth. So that was way back when I first started teaching, 15 years ago. And it wasn't really related to any games at all. It was just the role-playing aspect of putting you in this role.
Good. Kelly, what about you?
So I had the opportunity to teach a game writing class at the college level this past semester. So my background is in K-12 education. I was a high school teacher for 8 years, and then went to grad school and found myself teaching college. And I had the opportunity to pitch an honors course. And so I ended up having a lot of students who, when they found out, and when I was teaching my other classes, when they found out I was a game writer, they were super interested. And they're like, oh, we wish we could take a class in that. And I was like, well, let's see what we can do about that. And so I put this class together, and it was basically like introduction to tabletop role-playing game writing. And so we did a unit on world building, and then we did a unit on character creation, and thinking about how to make space for player characters as well as NPCs. And then we did a unit on story design, where we talked about different types of stories, linear and open world and such. And then I had them play test lots of different games, and they took note of which elements they liked. And of course, they're doing lots of little activities along the way to practice the skills. We had some guest panels, and some folks here participated in that, so thank you. So they could ask questions. And then they had a big project at the end where they had to essentially write their own module. And then I held a game fair where we invited the public and all their friends, and we had a bunch of professors come, and they got to go to a table and play through a module. And so they got, practice actually game mastering, so that they could, do their game. And it was so fun. I had a blast. The students all liked it.
Coolest professor ever.
It was pretty awesome.
That's one of the that's the kind of course I would have audited in a heartbeat if they had taught anything like that when I was going to college. I would have been all over that.
I had a bunch of grad students ask, "Can I take your class?" I was like, "No, it's only for honors."
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's interesting. Would you call it? I'm just wondering if both of you, when you refer to learning in this environment, do you refer to it as gamification? The reason why is because I'm a certified professional talent development. And so gamification is one of my certifications, which is bringing games into the workplace also in order to, encourage learning. So when you're doing it when you're thinking about RPG in the classroom, are you thinking of it as gamification?
What I just described, I think would not qualify as that because it's more teaching the art of game writing, but it sounds like possibly what Al described might be that. What do you think, Al?
Yeah, I mean, we don't use that terminology, or I've not used that terminology, but I think a lot of kids, even those that don't play tabletop role-playing games, are familiar with the concept of experience points. So one of the things that I did to try to make a connection between what we were doing and the kids is we were doing something called a playlist, which is basically you can do these things to help you prepare yourself to take the assessment eventually. The way I did it is I set it up like a pyramid, and they had to get certain number of experience points to travel up to the top of the pyramid. And then once they got to the top, that meant they could take the assessment, and celebrate. So that was super engaging. The kids were all really excited about that because they could pick and choose which parts of the pyramid they wanted to do to advance. I think that is gamification like you're speaking of, even though we might not use that terminology. Some kids might say, hey, this is just like such and such video game. I think that it definitely let the kids realize that there was a connection there to like what they were experiencing at home playing their video games. So that was a really engaging activity.
Good. So let's talk about the why. I'm always like, let's start with why, right? So why is this way of learning so important for the human mind? I want to hear from y'all. I know I have my opinions, but and there's even fact-based neuroscience about it. But why RPGs in learning? And I'm curious if we hear from everyone, including Jim. I know you're not an educator per se. I know you do training at work, but want to see why this is a methodology people might want to explore more.
I think that there are a couple of different points that you could hit on here. First is the problem-solving aspect of gamification, right? We've got, kids are struggling more and more with being able to solve their own problems, both academically and, social emotionally. And I think you can use role playing as a means to help them process that type of stuff. And I think that, the kids put themselves into a role and they get to experience things that maybe they're not used to experiencing, or maybe it allows them to put a voice to something that they are experiencing that they've not been able to voice before. I think that's a really important bit. And the second piece that I would say that RPG is really good for, especially at a middle school level, is teaching empathy, is being able to see the world through someone else's eyes. And it might not be the friend that's sitting next to them. It might be a character that they created. But it really allows them to start seeing, okay, well, this is my perspective. Well, somebody else might have a different perspective.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think RPGs in particular, like tabletop role-playing games, really encourage improvisation and kind of free play. And I've noticed, particularly in my college students, they tend to be hesitant to start the project because they're afraid to do it wrong, or because they don't know how to do all the different parts of it. It seems kind of overwhelming. But with tabletop RPGs, you're never going to have all of it, because part of it is the collaborative storytelling aspect that happens at the table. And so you're kind of freed up as a game writer to create something, but it doesn't have to be complete. And so I had a lot of students come in and on their little opening survey were like, I know nothing about this. I have no idea where to even start. And then I asked them to start creating a world on day one. And they're like, whoa, what? I can just start making stuff up, And that once they figured out, yes, in fact, that is how this works. That was very freeing to them to just sort of, start creating. And I think maybe the other thing is just that it's very empowering for vision, because it's fun to play in all kinds of different spaces. And so if you can imagine it, you can do it. Like one of my students made a setting called Cheese World. There's a planet made of cheese. Whatever they wanted, they could make happen, which is pretty cool.
I love hearing that you're setting up new neural pathways for them that they're not using in taking risks. Jim?
No, I think just tying both of those, everything I was saying and everything Kelly's saying is that I've always felt that RPG is that happy amalgamation of theater and writing and just playing make believe, right? Because like I think I've always believed that adults, we become adults because we forget to play. We forget to how fun it is just to play and goof off and be silly and do things differently and just and create stuff, right? Like I've been involved in some corporate trainings where you drop a bucket of Legos on a table and you tell people to start, you have to build this thing, and every table has different kinds of pieces. And so not only are you trying to figure out how to build, but you have to learn how to collaborate, right? You have to learn how to work with other people in trade. Like you develop your own trading systems. Like, well, we'll trade you these pieces for these pieces so that we can build our thing and you can build your thing and whatever. But I think adults by and large just forgot how to play somewhere along the way of having to deal with job and life and bills and everything else. We kind of let go of that piece of it. So doing an RPG though, you get to create whatever you want. You get to do a little bit of improv theater. And you get to just make stuff and do it collaboratively, like Kelly was saying. And I think that's one of the really cool things about collaborative RPGs is that you don't know what the story's going to be. You don't know how it's going to end because the group at your table is going to be different every time, and you'll come up with 10 different stories 10 different times you play it, and there's so much power in that, right? It's just so exciting to see it come together. So
yeah.
I really like that aspect, and the more we can teach that to people, not just kids and middle schoolers and college, but even adults too, in different environments. I think that's really what I want to do. I know
well, let's talk about how to do it. So I'm planning a corporate event right now. By the time this airs, it would have been over by a month. But what I do, and let's talk. I'm super want to hear this and put it on recording. So people, if they're at work or at school, they're like, well, this is too difficult. Well, actually, I kind of have a formula. I work with a lot of executives, have 550 employees. The executives say, Michael, these are our key learning points. These are the objectives. I ask them right away, when people leave the class, what is the 1 to 3 things you want to know? You're not going to get any more than that out of one session. 1 to 3 things, right? They write down what their 1 to 3 things are. And then I build the game. My team builds a game around them. So, for instance, if we're teaching customer service, we're doing a class on marketing and leasing apartments. And so we're going to make them role play bad experiences, what not to do, like make a list, and then you have to show us with your team how that looks, and then what to do. So we're talking about RPG here, right? And you could even have the class vote on, like, should they do this or should they do that? Raise your hand. Okay, let's see how that turns out. RPG, right? So you're talking about critical based problem solving, teamwork, think. What are your tips on if you want to create an RPG around a learning point? Say you have a learning point, you want to get it across. What are some tips so it doesn't become burdensome for the educator? What would you say? Kelly, you want to start?
Figured out early on in my class was to start simple and then move to more complex. So start with high structure where you assign roles and you have one objective and it's a very short little thing that they're going to role play through, and then move toward more complex things once my students got into groups and started working as a team and started trusting each other and they started figuring things out, then they were much more able to sort of do that. But if you just put people at a table and say role play, and it's not really great. So you almost have to model and kind of give them steps into it.
Yeah, I love that, Kelly. I was actually just going to talk about the system that I use is I do, we do, you do. And so I would always give an example of a scenario that I would role play through that maybe the kids gave me the criteria for, to show them how it's done. And then I might do a team-based thing where it's us maybe me prompting the kids on what their role play, what would you say in this scenario? What would you say in this scenario? So that we're kind of working through that together. And then once I felt like they kind of were getting into the flow of things, that's when I would put them together into groups and give them their roles. It's a tried and true way to teach, and I highly recommend it to try it.
Love that. Jim, in the corporate environment, have you had to build trainings like this? Have you had to do anything like that?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. I tended to lean into the instead of doing the individual work first and then going into the group. I would go right into the group and say, okay, here's the 5 people at your table. There's cards on the table. Everybody's got a role, and then some of them might have talking points, so that you'd have like some back and forth conversations between certain people. So you're kind of prompting them to know where to start at least. So they have some prompts, so they're just not trying to come up with it off the top of their head. They've got some prompts to start working through, and that worked out pretty well. I think I love the ideas that I'm hearing though, as far as starting them off slow and then going up to more advanced topics, and then also doing individual work and then going into a group work. But I think often the handful of corporate things I had to do were a fairly limited time frame. And when you only have so much time to do something, it's like, okay, you got to hit it, get in there, get it done. But I would love to have more time to do something like that. And I think that's where I'm kind of excited about going to a convention and running a game, because you get to play a little more 2-3 hour time instead of a 1 hour, brown bag meeting or something.
Yeah. I like it too. So maybe. Oh, go ahead, Al. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I like Jim. You mentioned something in there that was, I think, really important when doing these type of activities, is having access to criteria that they can reference as they're going through and role playing. So having role cards, I think, are super important that describe this is your job during this activity. And here's what you need to do. Here's the information that you have. I think having that out physically is going to help guide conversations, even with adults, honestly. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Love that. One of the things I do when I'm building, and I imagine you might be able to do it in a classroom setting too, is, society now. I recently was talking to Jim about an article I was reading in TD magazine that people don't like big blocks of text anymore. Really, we're living in a society where people want boom, boom, boom. Their eyes draw to information. You're seeing a lot more design, curriculum design, where they bold the main points for people, and then they can go read around it if they need more information. So one of the things I do is I kind of build into the learning scavenger hunt. And I could imagine you might be able to build that into an RPG where the characters are going through an adventure, which drives the real people, the students, to get into the book to find the clues to then go and answer the game and move forward in the game, because then they have an interest in the resource tool. And the whole goal of that would be purely to be like, hey, but once you're back in the real world, now you know that this resource has answers for that, and that. You don't need to memorize anything. You just need to learn how to utilize this resource. So is that a good strategy that you might be able to employ in a classroom too? Is that would there be a design around that?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially when you're getting into the cheat sheets or the reference material that you're given to students or participants or whatever, especially that bolding concept. I picked up on that a couple of years ago, and then that article you sent me really reinforced it. And I was like, oh man, I got that article from you, Michael, I think right in the middle of developing second edition. And I was like, shoot, how can I apply this to the manuscript? To at least get a start on it, right? Like I knew I didn't have enough time to do it, as fully as I wanted to, but I went in there and I started bolding a lot of concepts and bolding, and I really leaned on the graphic designers to retain that bolding when they went into layout, because I was like, this is actually more important than you realize, because like you're right, the walls of text don't work anymore, and I'm a little nervous about that, because we still do big RPG books, right? And big RPG books are lots and lots of text and lots of pictures, and we've gotten better with the flow charts. But more back to the topic though, Michael. Yeah, absolutely. Making those cheat sheets and reference materials super accessible to the broadest audience possible is really important, so that somebody can get to the table at a glance, pick it up, and understand what you're doing, and not have to spend 5-10 minutes focused time to look at it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who has been in meetings where the facilitator will hand out material and say, okay, for the next 5 minutes you're going to read
Death by PowerPoint. Please look at the YouTube Death by PowerPoint. One of the best 18-minute TED Talks ever.
It's like nobody wants to be in a meeting reading, right? That's just death.
One awesome thing that you mentioned, Michael, I know you were talking about text, but the scavenger hunt aspect of things. I was about a month and a half ago, I was walking through the halls of my school, and I saw a bunch of kids walking around with like a scavenger hunt list, essentially. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I saw their teacher walk out from a closet wearing a crown. And she's like, I'm the King of England. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, well, they're the revolutionary, and they're trying to get enough stock to have a war like against England. And
Wow.
I'm a redcoat, and I've also brought on a couple of the other teachers who are also, part of the British Army, and the kids have to not get caught while they're trying to procure supply. Like that is like,
I love
that's like
that.
LARPing essentially.
Yeah. And they'll never forget that experience and what it meant. Oh, that's awesome. Kelly, anything you want to add on that?
My students, especially my high school age students, love competition. And so anytime you can make it a game of who can find this the fastest, but the most accurate, like your information still has to be right, but like if you're racing another team, that's always super fun.
It's funny because one of the things, just to get, again, I want people to, when they're hearing this, if you're at work and someone gives you a training class to do, we're giving you some basic elements to make a class fun. So we have maintenance people who have to use an app in order to do their work orders for apartments. And so we make it a scavenger hunt where we build a fake apartment in a room, and they have to work in teams, and all of them have to get the most accurate inspection and get it back to us in time. And all 4 on the team have to have the exact same. So they're broken up in teams of 4. And it's amazing how people who are scared of technology and claim that they're not great using electronics, that simple competition factor that you're talking about, they get into it, they win prizes. And then it's kind of like at the end, it's like, okay. And as a company, we now know you have the capability to do this. So now you just better motivate yourself. And sometimes after they're like, turn it, because we have electronic proof that you did it once. But I guess it could work the same with students too, is they build confidence in learning. It's like, oh, I guess I can learn. And I love the fact that when I make them into teams, they're supportive of each other. And it sounds to me like both of you are not having people work solo in this, but you're actually having people work in teams, right?
A little bit of both, but teams is way more fun and way less stress for students. And I also noticed, like, when I first started my game class, every student was sitting at a separate table by themselves. And as soon as I had them get into game groups, from then on, the whole rest of the class, they sat in their groups and they had little social conversations and stuff. So it helps just with the social environment of a classroom or a learning space also.
Yeah, one of the cool things that has really popped up since COVID is content-based escape rooms that you can do in the classroom. So essentially, it's a bunch of work designed around, let's say you're talking about rocks and the rock cycle, and the kids are all sitting around a box that has locks on it, and they have to solve different things that have to do with the rock cycle in order to do it. And there's a company that even has roles that the kids take on, like the locksmith and the geologist and things like that, which tells them what they're in charge of when you're working on the escape room. And you can either do that as just a race against time, or you can do it as a competition against other groups. There's lots of flexibility there.
Have both of you noticed a bump in grades or performance because when you employ this methodology? Because that's really what it is, bottom line, right? If you're going to be employing it.
That I have data on grades, but I would say just observationally, I've noticed a bump in engagement, which I think is almost always leads to better outcomes, learning outcomes in the class for sure.
Agreed. Al, have you noticed anything?
I would say I wouldn't necessarily say better grades, but certainly more kids willing to try, and not just giving up right away. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen an uptick in students that They don't want to problem solve it all. They just want to be able to push a button and have an answer. And so these types of activities are really challenging for them. But if you can build the excitement, they're at least willing to try and to start pushing their brains to work a little bit harder. So I'm hoping that as we move into the future, these types of activities will help with that.
See, we track the data in my work, and I think that's important because to me, it's beyond the smile sheet. Just feel good. I think educators need to, whether in school or at work, need to build mechanisms to track. So we track, of course, safety incidents. Because we're doing training around gamification, are there less safety incidents? Yes. And then we compute that into the value of workers' compensation rates compared to previous years. Or we look at our participation engagement rate. Like we have 88% of our employees who go in at least 10 times a month to engage in our gamification modules. And we look at that and how that compares to turnover over the years. So I do want to say, education's well, actually, no, I want to say this, but I want you to push back if I'm wrong. Education is great if it's measurable. Now, how you measure good education, there's a diversity of that. What do you think about that statement?
I think that there needs to be value on the non-academic measurables. And most educational facilities report out on what your grades are on the content and not necessarily on the effort and the skills that you are using in order to achieve or process that content, right? You don't get a grade on social emotional skills. You might get an effort grade, but what does that even mean? So I think that is a direction that some states have decided to start moving is assessing kids based off of these real life skills as opposed to or in addition to content. And I'm hoping that will keep going into the future.
How do you measure empathy, right? There's some quantitative and qualitative measures on stuff. But the qualitative data is like we have less school shootings over the last 10 years that we haven't, but that is something that we as educators have to try to capture is what are those things that they claim are immeasurable. Sometimes 0 incidents is an amazing measure and people forget that sometimes, right? That 0 is great. And so, that really to me is like kind of the challenge that I think like if we're going to get RPG into more education, of course, it doesn't belong everywhere. People need to use different parts of their mind. I just think to what Jim was saying is that play as learning has been dropped out of the American curriculum for a long time. And it's how we introduce that back in. What would you suggest if you could introduce it back in? Al, you touched on it, or Kelly, Jim, anything to inspire people to introduce it back in?
I'm sorry, you trailed off there to introduce what?
Introducing it back in, like how to get it started. Do you feel like institutions would be pushed against it? Because I know for a fact that I've gone to different industries to train them about how to build classes, and they're like, no one's ever going to do that. I'm like, give it a try, but I actually have to fight to get them into gamification. And then once they do it, they're like, oh God, that was the highest rated class ever.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So what are you fighting against with that, Kelly? Go ahead.
Just clarifying that you're talking about how to get like play back into the curriculum.
Yep.
Yeah. I think there are lots of ways of doing this. But one thing that really worked in my high school classroom was allowing time for, we called it sacred writing time, where they could just write whatever they wanted, and they didn't have, there weren't any grades attached to it. So they learned to just enjoy creating things just for the sake of doing it, so that then when it was time to actually be assessed, they had the confidence to do that. And I think games could be a place where you can play with these concepts, you can take risks, you can try things without having, it's not an assessment. Like you can just practice so that when it's time to be assessed, like you have more confidence.
I was finding that sometimes the hardest sell isn't the students, it's the institutions.
That's exactly where I was going with this, Michael, is you need to get your employees on board. You need to get the educators on board and excited about doing this type of stuff. If you are doing a training session, like teaching teachers how to teach role playing, you need to get them excited about it and get them into it, because if it's not something that they're excited about or something that they believe will work, it's never, the kids are going to see that, you know what I mean? So I think you really have to start at those top levels, from an administrative perspective, to train your staff to be excited about this type of stuff. And then once they're all excited, you can get them starting to integrate it more into their classrooms.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really important to have a very, very clear why at the beginning. Like, why are you creating this training, and why are you either encouraging or requiring people to attend it, right? Like most of the training I've done is for sellers, right? For salespeople, and like most of their time is devoted to selling, right? If they're not out there either hitting the phone calls or the emails or beating the streets, then they're not selling. And they need to sell because most of them are commission sellers. And if they're not selling, then they're not making income, right? Either for themselves or for the company. And to ask a group of sellers, oh, take 2 hours out of one of your days for a couple of days or whatever, and sit in this classroom and with some of your peers and learn something, they're always going to push back and say, why do I need to be there? What are you going to teach me that I could possibly apply to my daily life is going to make me be, what's the wisdom, right? What's in it for me? And that's where, going back to what you were saying earlier, Michael, about talking to the leadership and getting their real clear understanding. What do you want this training to accomplish? And then you have to sell that to the participants, right? You have to attend this training because we want you to learn these 3 things or 2 things or whatever, and get their buy-in so that they actually show up, right? So because if they're not required to attend, they're probably not going to, and then you've got to figure that out and talk to leadership about that.
Yeah, I guess bringing it back to Star Trek universe, we're talking about the learning environment being the Vulcan learning pod, or learning environment being a holodeck. And the kind of instructors and students we're dealing with, is how I see it. I'm a holodeck kind of person myself, but there are some people who, for various reasons, geography, institution, culture, the Vulcan learning pod works. They want the didactic Oxford level learning, but that doesn't work for every brain set. Right. So you got to really be able to adapt. And can you adapt one RPG game to fit all those brain sets?
There's kind of a time and a place for all of these things. Like, I think everyone needs direct instruction on some things, but having the freedom to use a gaming environment or a collaborative learning environment in certain content areas and for certain groups. I also really like allowing students choice. So if to give them an opportunity to choose how they want to go about learning something or how to demonstrate their learning, especially later in a course, I think is really important too.
Excellent.
My students are well aware that I write for role-playing games, and so many of them are like, I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what that is. And, a couple of them, are big sports kids. And I was like, well, do you play fantasy football? You're role-playing. You are a manager of a team, right? And then they're like, oh, I guess that's right, and so like that's my little in, and I think that like if you can find that connection, that every single kid has some type of connection to role play in one way or another, that's when you can really start building some exciting stuff with them.
Very smart. Okay, cool. And that's what we're talking about, so I thought this would be such a cool subject, to tackle. I don't think people think of RPG as a big educational tool. And I think only those of us who maybe write it and play it so much are like, I've learned so much in my life playing RPG. I want people to have that same experience. And to Kelly's point too, it's not for everyone. It's a tool in the toolkit for educators. There's some people who want to play the game, and a lot of people who don't know about it. So I think I love how you framed that as a possible tool to expand one's toolkit. All right. So with that, let's just have one last go round as we usually do, and then we'll do some gratitude. Jim, what's your big takeaway when we talk about RPG as education?
Oh, well, I was going to ask some questions, but if you want to
go ahead. No,
wrap up, we'll just wrap up. That's fine.
I didn't see you unmute, so I thought you had no more questions.
I've been muting and unmuting all night long, Michael. You've been
okay, go ahead.
As you always do. So that's
sorry.
But so I'll just go to my wrap up and we'll skip the questions and we'll save it for another show, I guess.
No,
but, yeah, I think as you know, as educators, it's important to give your participants a variety of options, and I think RPG is just one powerful way of doing that. Just to give them chances to play and to do different things, and to just to learn something different, right? And just to Al, I love your idea of finding different ways of putting different lenses on things that they're probably already doing. And saying, well, that's an RPG. That's a form of RPG. You may not realize that fantasy football is a form of RPG, but it is, right? So, really great stuff. Kelly, Al, yeah, either you want to jump in?
I feel horribly guilty now, Jim. I feel like I'm asking some really good questions.
I guess one of my takeaways is that games in the classroom, whether you're playing them or teaching students how to do them, I am frequently impressed with the level that my students engage. And so I think it's a great way to learn to trust students to sort of take the reins on their own learning. And that's really important for students, but also as educators, for us to learn to let the students kind of show us what they can do and where their strengths are, and to work together on things.
And just, it's really important too that this doesn't necessarily just have to happen in a classroom, right? If you're a parent, you can do these things with your kids, right? Get them thinking in this way. I have 5-year-old twin boys who sit down and we play Marvel Multiverse all the time, the role-playing game. So a couple of things to think about, like even if you can find those old choose your own adventure books, right? And read them to your kids and give them the options and let them choose and then explain why they choose, right? That's when you're really starting to show them how to role play. I do this with my 7th graders, and we get into debates over like which direction should we go. And I think if you start small, you can open up to things like using Captain's Log to provide a story prompt and an antagonist for kids that have to write a narrative. You know what I mean? I think you can get to some very high levels, especially, I mean, speaking from the middle school level, if you start small and then work your way up. I think it's there's a lot to come with role playing in education.
Yeah, I hope to see it adapt more and more in the years. Good. All right. So let's go to gratitude. First, I'm going to give gratitude to Jim for being so patient with me because I'm hyper and run ahead, apparently. And I broke our unmute rule. I guess I wasn't looking sharp enough at it. So thank you, Jim, for 136 episodes of exquisite patience. And also want to give a thank you to Kevin Werbach and Dan Hunter. They have a book that I love and I keep by my office desk at all times, which is the Gamification Toolkit, Dynamics, Mechanics, and Components for the Win. So it shows you how to go ahead and create these games. And then there's another one called Game Storming that gives you like 100 ideas for quick things you could do for teams. And it would work at school. It would work around work. But if you have to put together a curriculum, game storming you could flip through it real quick, find it for the right amount of people and what your learning objective is. And I find those super helpful tools, which everyone on my team has as reference for that. So those are my thank yous for today. Let's go Al, Kelly, and then Jim.
I have 2 shout outs today. The first is BC Homes and the Spader cards. When I heard that, I just laughed. I laughed so hard. And then Wayne Peters for that tricorder, which is spectacular. I printed one off for Jim too. I'm going to be shipping it to him. I'm calling it the Al Spader variant, so you can put your momentum and threat tokens in there as well. Super excited. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being so great for the community and for putting my name on your stuff. That's awesome.
I've been talking all night about this awesome class I got to teach, I feel like I should thank the honors program of Iowa State University for giving me the opportunity to teach that and to trust me to lead this class. It was a really great experience. Also to just all of the folks who use STA and have kept it going and enjoy it. And it makes our lives as creators so cool to know that there are people everywhere out there enjoying our products.
So Al, before I do my gratitude, what's your favorite color?
Purple.
Purple? Oh, okay. Well, that's not to say that's boring. Congratulations, that's awesome. But I was gonna when I get the tricorder from you, I was thinking of painting a colored stripe on it like they did on Lower Decks. And so it's like the purple stripe on the Lower Decks one. But if it's purple, then good to go.
Yeah.
I'll just do a purple stripe. That's perfect.
Yeah, I know that Aaron wrote something about the purple stripe in the Lower Decks guide.
Lower Decks
I forget what it was, but
absolutely cool. Okay, great. As far as gratitude goes, I need to thank all the educators out there in the world who are working so hard for so little pay and so little recognition. You are doing amazing work. Please don't stop doing it because I would not be where I am if I didn't have a couple of good educators in my life who actually encouraged me, as opposed to just kind of like push me through the paces and, did the job right, or did the bare minimum. But I had a high school counselor who was also an educator, encouraged me in my writing, and then I had one college professor who saw some of my drabbles and said, "Hey, this is really good. Have you ever thought about trying to do more writing?" And that was like literally the only person I can remember other than that counselor who like actually saw what I was doing, saw something in it, and was proactively encouraging me to do something with it. So educators, like, you never know what you're going to say to somebody that's going to make a difference. So you are making a difference. So don't ever stop. And also to all the fans, thank you all the fans for STA for supporting us the last many years. Love you. Thank you. And keep looking forward to more.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you, Al and Kelli, for joining us again. The conversation continues. Until next time, IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. Talk to you all next time.